Welcome to the debate. Think of the most famous painting of the 20th century.
Oh, I mean, people probably immediately picture something huge, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You imagine approaching it in a gallery, bracing yourself for something massive, something that just physically overwhelms you.
Right.
But then you arrive at the frame, and the canvas is, well, it's barely 24 centimeters wide.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is smaller than a standard sheet of notebook paper.
Exactly. It's tiny. Today we are looking at Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory, an image that essentially broke how humanity conceptualizes reality itself.
It really did. And it's amazing how much controversy such a tiny canvas can generate.
Truly. And we are going to explore a very specific tension at the heart of this work today. I will be arguing that this painting is a highly calculated, deliberate attack on the logical structure of time, one that perfectly captures the profound, genuine isolation of the modern condition.
And I come at it from a totally different angle. I contend the piece must be understood as a pure manifestation of the subconscious that defies structured, logical interpretation.
Right. So let's start with the intentionality behind the piece. Because if you look at the sheer technique, the way the paint is applied, it practically demands a logical, structural reading.
Well, I mean, demand is a strong word, but go on.
Hear me out. If you were explaining this painting to a first-year undergraduate art history student, the very first thing you would point out is the brushwork.
Sure, the technical proficiency.
Exactly. Dalí is using the meticulous, hyper-realistic technique of a classic Renaissance master, but he is using it to paint the impossible. That friction is entirely deliberate.
Okay, but
Wait, let me just finish this point. When you analyze the imagery of the clocks, they are not just drooping. They are described as soft, lifeless, and fundamentally decaying.
right, the decaying aspect.
Yes, that word, decaying, is the linchpin for me. Dalí is not just whimsically bending time. He is taking the ultimate mechanical, rigid construct of human order, the pocket watch, and rendering it as something organic that is just rotting away in the sun.
Okay, I see where you're going.
It is a calculated philosophical position. Think about the era, right? It's 1931. The world is becoming intensely industrialized. It's entirely governed by factory whistles, train schedules, the rigid ticking of the clock.
Yeah, the obsession with efficiency.
Exactly. Dalí paints a targeted critique of humanity's obsession with fixed time. And look at the environment he places these decaying clocks into.
You mean the landscape in the background?
Yes, it is characterized by absolute silence, no movement, no people. He is systematically stripping away the comforting, logical structures of society to expose the profound discomfort and, honestly, the isolation beneath it all.
I hear that, and well, it is a beautifully constructed argument. But I think by over-intellectualizing a 24-centimeter painting, we actually tame it.
Tame it. How so?
We undermine its core identity as a masterwork of surrealism. You use phrases like calculated philosophical position and targeted critique. But when we actually look at Dalí's own admission regarding the origin of this iconic imagery...
Oh, you're going to bring up the cheese, aren't you?
I am absolutely bringing up the cheese. He famously stated that the idea came simply from watching a wheel of camembert cheese melt in the sun on a hot afternoon.
Right, but...
Let me finish, because that sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds totally mundane. But it is deeply profound exactly because of its absurdity.
I mean, I guess...
The fact that the most famous visual representation of time's fluidity comes from melting dairy, that proves that the painting isn't a structured sociological critique at all. It is an unfiltered look at the irrational, visceral reality of the dreamer.
Okay, but you can't take his statement completely at face value.
Why not? When you try to map a logical waking world critique onto melting cheese, I think you miss the central thesis of the subconscious. In a dream, time simply feels different. The logic centers of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, they completely shut down.
Sure, biologically speaking.
Right. A few seconds can stretch into what feels like hours. Meaning just collapses. Dalí was painting that terrifying, unintellectualized reality of the sleeping mind, not, drafting the thesis of a logical observer.
but do you really think he's just painting cheese? Like truly, let's push on that famous anecdote for a second.
I'm ready.
Think of it like a magician's misdirection.
Oh, a magician's misdirection, okay.
Yeah. The hallmark of a great illusion is that the magician gets you to look at something mundane so you don't notice the mechanics of the trick. Is it not highly probable that Dali used a ridiculous, almost comedic inspiration like melting camembert precisely to disarm the viewer?
I think you're giving the dairy a bit too much philosophical weight.
No, listen. He gets you to drop your intellectual guard. And once you do, bam! He delivers this devastating, highly structured attack on the rigid construct of logical time.
Devastating attack?
Yes, you are forced to look at these lifeless, rotting clocks, and suddenly, the systems you use to organize your entire waking life feel incredibly fragile. It is deeply subversive.
It is subversive, absolutely. But the misdirection isn't Dali hiding a philosophical treatise behind a wheel of cheese.
Then what is it?
The misdirection is your own waking mind, trying desperately to find order in the absurd. You are doing exactly what the waking brain does.
Which is what?
Demanding that the melting cheese must be a metaphor for something structural and logical. But surrealism was built to spring exactly that trap. Let's look at this through the lens of a science student today.
Okay, let's hear it.
Physics tells us that absolute time doesn't exist, right? Time is relative, it dilates, it stretches. But physics approaches that logically. Dali approaches it viscerally.
Interesting distinction.
Right. The distortion of those clocks isn't a targeted attack on the mechanical measurement of time. It is simply a factual representation of what happens when the conscious mind goes offline.
Factual?
Yes, the clocks are soft and lifeless because in the deep architecture of the subconscious, the concept of a rigid second or minute just cannot survive. It literally loses its structural integrity. Imposing the idea of a devastating attack on the image fundamentally alters its nature.
I disagree. I don't think it alters it.
You are turning an expression of internal, subjective truth into an act of external political aggression.
Well, I don't think it's political aggression per se, but the visual language is inherently aggressive to our waking sensibilities. I mean, bending a memory is one thing, but taking a gold pocket watch—
An expensive one, yeah.
Right, an object designed to conquer the natural world through precision, and having ants swarm over it as if it were dead flesh. That is an aggressive subversion of reality. It forces the viewer into a genuinely uncomfortable space.
But who is experiencing that discomfort?
The viewer. Us.
You are assuming an external, logical observer is the one experiencing the painting. But this brings us to the very center of the canvas, which honestly completely anchors my perspective.
You're talking about the figure.
Yes, right in the middle of this desolate landscape is that incredibly strange, melted, fleshy figure. Art historians generally agree this is a distorted self-portrait of Dalí himself.
Yeah, you can see his eyelashes, his nose.
Exactly. But completely deflated, half asleep, and entirely trapped inside the dream state. This figure reframes the entire painting. It proves the work is a completely subjective closed loop.
A closed loop?
Yes. We are not looking at an objective landscape where society's relationship with time is being critiqued. We are looking at the interior architecture of sleep itself. The dreamer is the universe here.
Okay, but wait just a second. The way the clock melts over the dreamer's form represents how memory bends and time dilates purely from within the dream state. It defies any external logical observation because the dreamer cannot step outside of their own mind to observe the process.
That is an incredibly vivid way to describe the central figure. I'll give you that. But I would frame its significance entirely differently.
I figured you would. Yes, we have this vulnerable dreamer in the center, this deflated, almost embryonic face trapped in sleep. But look at where that dreamer is situated.
On the ground?
In the landscape. If this painting were purely an exploration of the subjective, whimsical, irrational nature of dreams, the environment would likely reflect that, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily.
It would be fluid, shifting, perhaps chaotic, like the actual mechanics of REM sleep. Instead, Dalí places this distorted, half-asleep figure in an environment defined by intense, unyielding, static emptiness.
The cliffs, you mean?
Yes. Look at the cliffs in the background. They are the cliffs of Cap de Cruis in Catalonia. They are hard, permanent, geological forms. There is no movement. There are no people. It is a harsh, fixed environment.
Okay.
I argue that placing this deeply vulnerable soft dreamer into such an oppressive, static setting creates a profound tension. It highlights the friction between our internal dream states, where time is fluid, and the harsh, rigid reality we are ultimately forced to wake up to.
That's quite a leap.
The juxtaposition is the critique. The central figure isn't just dreaming, it is stranded in a world that does not care about its internal softness.
Stranded, yes, but not in the waking world's reality. The figure is stranded in the absolute void of its own subconscious.
But the rocks are real.
You are looking at that empty landscape and seeing an oppressive modern waking world environment. But the discomfort that the landscape creates stems specifically from the fact that it lacks all the markers of the waking world.
Right, which feels like isolation.
No, think about the feeling of sleep paralysis, or that bizarre twilight state just before you fully fall asleep. The physical world genuinely stops existing. That profound silence isn't a commentary on societal alienation. It is the absolute terror and wonder of the deep subconscious mind, stripped completely of sensory input.
So the landscape is just emptiness?
Exactly. The reason the cliffs are there, glowing in that strange, cold light, is because they are a fading memory of the waking world, entirely inaccessible to the dreamer. It is an exploration of the absolute absence of reality, not a critique of it.
I just cannot accept that it is merely an absence of reality, because the emotional weight of that specific background translates far too perfectly to the waking world. Let's view this through the perspective of a contemporary art critic today.
Okay, putting on the critic hat.
The reason this painting hits even harder now than it did in 1931 is because of that landscape. Think about the last time you woke up at 3 in the morning.
Probably yesterday.
Right. The world outside is completely still, the machinery of society is stopped, and all you hear is, the mechanical ticking of a wall clock or the hum of a refrigerator.
Sure, it's quiet.
But that jarring sensation, the profound silence, the feeling that the rest of the world has vanished, it is incredibly isolating. Dalí has captured a masterclass in genuine modern isolation.
I think you're projecting a bit.
No, think about it. We live in a society governed by incredibly rigid systems, algorithms, schedules, digital calendars, yet we increasingly find ourselves in landscapes of profound emotional and social emptiness. Dalí stripped away the noise of society to leave us with nothing but decaying time and a vast, empty horizon.
But
just one more thing. That is exactly why it resonates today as a structural critique. It brilliantly captures the quiet, gnawing discomfort of the modern human condition.
I have to push back strongly on that. I think you are taking a 24-centimeter canvas painted nearly a century ago and projecting a very 21st century anxiety backward onto it.
I don't think it's just a 21st century anxiety. You are looking at a painting that was designed to show the visceral feeling of sleep, and you were trying to make it a mirror for modern loneliness. But when reality actually breaks apart in a profound dream state, you do not feel modern isolation.
What do you feel then?
You feel something much more ancient. You feel a primal, terrifying emptiness. The fact that there are no people and no movement isn't a critique of how industrialized society alienates us. It is just a factual representation of the deep sleep state. Factual, again. During deep sleep, the external world has genuinely ceased to exist for your consciousness. That is actually why Surrealism became such a massive global movement.
Because of sleep?
Because it tapped into universal human hardware. It wasn't just a European critique of industrialization. Whether you are in 1930s Paris or anywhere else in the world, every human being knows the absolute vertigo of the rational mind dissolving into the absurd.
Okay, but if it were purely a representation of a biological sleep state, a universal human hardware, as you say, why does it possess such a lasting philosophical impact beyond the realm of psychology?
Because it's visually stunning? More than that. The enduring legacy of this piece is that it completely changed how people think about reality itself. It didn't just change how people think about dreams.
And that requires the painting to be in an active dialogue with the waking world?
I don't see why it requires that.
Because by presenting this hyper-realistic landscape where the world has essentially stopped, right alongside these clocks that have completely lost their rigid mechanical authority, Dali is handing the logical observer the exact tools needed to question their waking life.
The modern isolation I am referring to isn't just loneliness. It is the philosophical realization that the rigid logical structures we rely on to make sense of the world, time, progress, societal order, they are ultimately as soft, lifeless, and arbitrary as those melting clocks.
That is a very bleak view of waking life.
But that's the profound discomfort of the painting. It comes from that critique hitting uncomfortably close to home.
It changed how people think about reality because it proved that reality is inherently subjective.
Subjective, sure, but
No, think about it. Before movements like Surrealism broke into the mainstream, the prevailing assumption was that reality was a shared, fixed external construct.
right.
By painting the irrational so perfectly, by showing that a mundane concept originating from, yes, melting cheese, could visually articulate the collapse of time with such power, Dalí demonstrated that the subconscious mind is just as real as the waking world.
I agree with that part.
But the discomfort you are identifying isn't the discomfort of a modern sociological condition. It is the cognitive dissonance, the sheer vertigo of realizing your own mind is fully capable of dissolving the fundamental laws of physics.
But isn't that a critique of physics?
No. Having a few seconds stretch into hours, feeling your own memory bend and distort, these are deeply unsettling, profoundly internal experiences. Surrealism's true power lies in its absolute refusal to be logical. When you over-intellectualize the silence of that landscape as modern isolation, or you frame the melting clocks as a calculated structural attack, you are attempting to tame the painting. You are trying to make it safe and understandable.
I certainly wouldn't say that acknowledging the structural brilliance of the composition makes it safe.
I think it does.
In fact, I would argue that recognizing Dalí carefully engineered this discomfort makes the painting even more formidable. It is not an accident of the subconscious. It is a meticulously constructed trap.
A trap?
Yes. To pull the threads of my argument together, I believe that the power of the persistence of memory comes from its precise combination of elements. It is the calculated rendering of mechanical time as something decaying and lifeless, paired deliberately with the profound, static silence of that Catalonian landscape.
Okay.
By placing a deeply vulnerable, trapped figure into a setting that perfectly captures genuine modern isolation, Dalí forces the logical observer to confront the fragility and perhaps the absurdity of the very systems we use to measure and validate our waking lives.
And, well, to pull my threads together, I maintain that the enduring magnetic power of this painting lies squarely in its unapologetic irrationality.
The cheese.
The cheese. The fact that it originates from something as delightfully mundane as melting cheese perfectly illustrates Surrealism's embrace of the absurd.
Right.
When we focus on the strange, melted face of the dreamer in the center of the canvas, we are granted an unfiltered reflection of the bizarre, unstructured nature of the dreaming mind. It is a purely subjective space where time dilates, where memories bend in on themselves, and where the external world simply ceases to exist.
Okay.
Attempting to force a logical, sociological critique onto this image is to entirely miss the visceral, terrifying reality of the subconscious void.
Yet, despite our fundamentally different approaches to the mechanics of the painting, whether it operates as a meticulously structured attack on order or a pure, unmediated manifestation of the absurd, it is actually fascinating how closely we converge on its ultimate psychological achievement.
How so?
We both clearly agree that the persistence of memory perfectly captures the exact sensation of what the human mind goes through when reality breaks apart.
Oh, absolutely. That is the undeniable truth of the canvas. Whether you believe that breaking apart is an intentional, philosophical deconstruction of modern time, or simply the profound biological disorientation of slipping into a deep dream state, the physical effect on the viewer is identical.
Exactly.
That sinking feeling of reality distorting, of meaning collapsing under its own weight, that is exactly why a work painted nearly a century ago still feels startlingly modern and even unnerving to us today.
It really highlights the immense value of examining a complex movement like Surrealism from multiple, sometimes conflicting angles.
Definitely.
When we allow ourselves to appreciate the rigorous structural critique the imagery might contain, while simultaneously embracing the visceral, dreamlike absurdity it unapologetically presents, the painting opens up entirely. We move past the cliché of melting clocks and enter a much deeper conversation.
Right. There is just so much more to explore regarding how the human brain processes memory.
And how desperately we try to measure reality, and what happens to our psyche when the rigid structures we rely on inevitably begin to melt away.
It certainly leaves us with a lot to unpack the next time we find ourselves staring blankly at a clock or, trying to desperately reconstruct the logic of a fading dream over breakfast.
Indeed it does, and we will leave it to you, the listener, to determine which perspective resonates most when you consider Dali's masterpiece. Is it a calculated mirror reflecting our own modern isolation, or a window into the untamable void of the sleeping mind?
Or maybe both.
Maybe both. But as you walk away from our discussion today, think back to that tiny 24-centimeter canvas. Ask yourself, how does something smaller than a piece of notebook paper manage to make the entire rigid, monumental structure of time feel so incredibly soft, lifeless, and on the verge of melting completely away?